Hi, and welcome to Healthy You, Class 6, Bringing It All Together in Next Steps. Today is our final session of our 6-week series. Thank you to everyone who has joined us consistently. Today is going to be a little review of everything we've covered so far in the course, and you'll have a chance to apply some of your new knowledge to some common situations that you might encounter going forward. At this point, I'd like to ask, is there anyone who would like to share their goal from last week and review with the class how their progress went? Does anyone have any questions about last week's material or the resources in the book? For those of you who are listening to the presentation by YouTube, I'd just ask you to reflect upon what that goal was that you set for last week, if you did set one, and to reflect on how it went. Did you meet your goals? Were you successful? Bringing it all together. As an overview of today's class, we will discuss several different things that are, as you can see here on the slide. So first thing we'll discuss is dining out, some strategies for eating away from home. Second, we'll go through some scenarios to consider. What would you do if a certain situation arises? Third, we will discuss how to make lifestyle changes that are going to last in future. And finally, we will conclude with next steps going forward. Throughout Healthy You, we have discussed the vitality approach to health. So just to recap, in week 1, for example, we discussed the food environment and our environment and how this can have an impact on our behaviors and the choices that we make. We looked at some strategies in order to increase our awareness of the environment and to reflect upon some ways that that influences our behavior, because we know that ultimately the things that we do, the choices that we make, will have a bearing on our overall health and well-being. So to build upon that, in week number 2, we discussed being active, and we reviewed some things, some reflections on what motivates us, what helps us to keep movement and be physical activity in our day. And we learned how to make some SMART goals around being physically active. We know this is very important because physical activity can lead to a sense of well-being, and this is another key aspect to the vitality approach to health, is feeling good about ourselves. So in order to foster that, we learned about some different aspects of self-talk and how that can impact our sense of well-being. So we discussed some strategies for self-acceptance. After this, in weeks 3, 4, and 5, we delved into a lot of information about nutrition and eating well. We learned some new food skills in terms of how to read food labels, understanding the different nutrients. And so to build upon that, today in our session, what we are going to discuss now is how we can eat well and apply our knowledge of the food skills that we've learned to a common situation that we might encounter. And that situation is eating away from home. So by a quick show of hands, how many people will order some food or get takeout or eat food outside of the home? For most of us, it's not uncommon to eat away from home, but this can sometimes pose different challenges when it comes to eating healthy and eating well. So what are some things that can influence whether or not we decide to eat away from home? For those of you who are listening through YouTube, I would just ask, can you think of some things that you might consider? So for example, it might be cost of food, it might be the taste of food. Perhaps you are eating away from home because time is of the essence. You don't have a lot of time to do some food prep, so going to get something or to order something makes more sense in terms of time. For many people, they might have to consider food safety or whether or not they can find a place to eat or order food that is going to meet their specific health needs, their specific nutrition needs. Other people might consider reviews, so read some reviews online of a new restaurant or a place and get other people's opinion as to whether or not it's a good place to eat. So here's a question for you to consider. Do you think that eating away from home is something that can be done and still eat healthy? The answer is yes, because as we've discussed throughout Healthy You, we are trying to make all foods fit into healthy eating. So there's some ways that we can eat away from home and still make healthy food choices. One aspect to consider when we are eating away from home is sometimes we don't know exactly nutritionally what it is that we are having in our foods. So one nutrient that we have not yet discussed, which we have saved for our last discussion today, is the nutrient sodium. And we're discussing this because in fast foods, restaurant foods, takeout foods, the sodium content can usually be much greater than it is at home, because 70% of our salt intake actually comes from processed food. So more so from things like deli meats and Kraft Dinner and noodles or fast food, soups, sauces, something that is canned or pickled or smoked or cured foods. These often will have sodium in them, and so the salt shaker itself is not so much the major contributor of sodium to our diet. It's really about the sodium that's found in those foods that we eat. Just to poll the audience, how many people know how much sodium we should have in our diet on a daily basis? Previous research has recommended that the amount of sodium that we should consume in a day is somewhere in the range of 2,300 to 2,500 milligrams. So for example, the Heart and Stroke Foundation suggests that the safe upper limit would be about 1 teaspoon's worth of sodium. 1 teaspoon worth of salt, which is 5 mils of salt. And this is equivalent to 2,300 milligrams of sodium. So in that 1 teaspoon of salt, there's 2,300 milligrams of sodium. Moderate intake is now considered to be around 2,300 to 4,600 milligrams of sodium. And most Canadians consume on average somewhere in the middle of that, so around the 3,500 milligram mark for their sodium intake on a daily basis. We know that looking at the sodium content is important because when we lower the sodium in our diet, research has shown us that it can help to lower our systolic blood pressure by as much as 4 to 5 points. So when we have an excessive amount of sodium in our diet, which is about 5,000 milligrams per day, that can actually be linked to an increased risk in blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. So some strategies in order to lower the sodium in your diet, first thing would be to try to limit the number of processed foods or fast foods that you're consuming. Also, if you are using some foods that come in a can, give them a good rinse under some water before you use them. Avoid adding salt with a salt shaker to your foods. And always check the food labels to see if there might be a hidden source of sodium in terms of one of the additives that have been put into the food. The nutrition facts table is one tool that we can use in order to try to lower our sodium intake. So the first step when we're reading the nutrition facts table is to always look at the serving size and to think whether or not that serving size is what you are actually going to eat. So the portion is what you will actually eat. In this case on the food label it says One serving is one bowl, which weighs 400 grams. And if we look down to the sodium content, one bowl has 860 milligrams of sodium. So if, for example, I eat the entire bowl, I get 860 milligrams. If I'm not very hungry that day and I decide, oh, I only want to eat half the bowl is my portion size, so then I get to divide that sodium in half. So now we're at 430 milligrams of sodium. Next question is whether or not this is a lot. So as a general rule of thumb, if the sodium content is greater than 400 milligrams in your serving or in your portion, then this is too much. This is quite a lot of sodium. If it's 200 to 400 milligrams, might want to be cautious or perhaps look to see if there's another food that might have a lower amount of sodium. If it's 0 to 200 milligrams, we put that in the green category. That's good. 0 to 200 milligrams per serving is good. Just to recall that when I measure out 1 teaspoon of salt, that has 2,300 milligrams of sodium. So now we're going to do an activity together about making healthier choices when it comes to eating out. And so I'll ask you, when you think of the foods that you get for fast food or for takeout or for delivery, what are some of the traits about those foods that make it less healthy? I'm going to make a little list if you can shout them out. And so for those of you listening to our YouTube, some examples of things that have been said included the foods might be high in salt, they have a lot of fat, or they're deep fried, or they're battered. When we go out to eat, we have sugary drinks or large portion sizes. Often there's very little fruit or vegetable, and they can also be really low in fiber. So that was a good list that we made. And so looking at this list, what are some things that we can do in order to make a healthier choice? So for example, instead of deep fried, choosing something that is grilled or baked. Perhaps instead of asking for that serving of fries, see if there's a substitution, if you can have a side of vegetables. Maybe taking part of the portion home and having that for another meal at a different time. If that's available, maybe choosing something like a whole grain crust for a pizza or a multigrain, or if there's a side that would have some more fiber to it. When we look at some of these less healthy traits and some of the solutions, the one thing I wanted to emphasize is that the goal that we have here when we're trying to make healthier choices when it comes to eating out, it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes we're just trying to make a step in the right direction to choose something that is going to be slightly healthier, but always bearing in mind that when it comes to food, we're trying to make all foods fit, and we want to eat the foods that we love as well as the foods that are healthy for us. In order to make informed choices when eating out, try to apply some of the strategies that you've learned in Healthy You to make healthier choices. So for example, remember the healthy plate method. So the plate method means that you're trying to have half your plate vegetable, a quarter protein, a quarter starch. If you can, try to look for foods that would have a higher fiber content to them, so whole grain, whole wheat. Look for foods that are going to be lower in sodium and saturated fat. If possible, try to avoid extra added sugars, whether it's from pops or juices or sweetened beverages. Being mindful of the portion size is also very important. So tuning into how full you are during your dining experience if you're eating out, and listening to those internal cues. Maybe putting aside part of the portion if you feel like you don't need to eat it all, then save some for later. Another helpful tool that can be very informative when we're trying to make healthy choices when eating out is the nutrition facts information that can be found online. So by law, chain restaurants must supply details about the nutrition information of their food to the customer. This might come from a binder. Sometimes it's at the back of the store, or it might be a pamphlet that can be provided to you. Sometimes you have to ask in order to see the nutrition information, but for many chain restaurants, that information can be found online. So if, for example, you have a favorite restaurant that you go to, or you get takeout from a particular place that's a chain restaurant, do a search online and see if you can find that information. One of the activities that we're going to do in class now is to look at some of those nutrition facts that we can find online for our favorite restaurants, and we'll go through an example of calculating a meal and seeing how much we are getting in terms of nutrition content there. That brings us to our break, so I invite you to stand up, take a stretch, get something to drink or some snack if you need something, and we will be back in 5 minutes to continue on with our class. Welcome back from the break. Now we are going to talk about how to keep changes that are made. So you may have already started to make some changes since starting the program. For many people, the challenge that comes is the next step when we are trying to keep up with those changes and keep them going. So unlike our chameleon here that we see in the picture, we want to make the changes lasting and not just transient when it comes to what our environment is like around us. We're trying to make changes for the long term. I'd like to go through a case study with you now. So here's a situation. Sarah has been making gradual lifestyle changes to eat regularly, pay attention to her hunger cues, and was working on walking for 20 minutes in order to get to work each day. Then all of a sudden at work, a new project came along. That meant that Sarah was doing a lot of overtime, which resulted in her having to rush to get to work every day. So eventually she was no longer packing a healthy lunch or snacks. And she started to think to herself, oh, well, that change that I made was never meant to last. So now Sarah is finding that she's starting to arrive home late every night, and because she didn't pack a lunch for work, she's often starving and has to order some takeout, or she just ends up flopping on the couch all evening and eating whatever she can scrounge up around the house in front of the TV. So back to where she started, essentially. This case study demonstrates how changing our behavior can be challenging. Often we find we might be doing very well for about 3 or 4 months. We're making positive lifestyle changes, but then, like the case study with Sarah, suddenly something happens in our life that changes the situation. So it could be stress at work, it could be personal illness. You might find that all of a sudden you're just running short on time, and then because those changes have occurred in our life, we end up resorting back to our usual pattern. So the thing that we were comfortable with and the thing that helped us to get through the day, that becomes our regular routine again. What can we learn from Sarah in this example? Most importantly, we want to recognize the fact that lapses are normal. It's difficult to keep positive changes going. Sometimes we get off track. The process of change often involves lapses. What do you think led Sarah to revert back to her old habits. How would awareness around the situation change the unfolding of the events? With awareness, for example, Sarah could have noticed that the increased stress she was experiencing was causing her to lapse in her old behaviors, and that she was trying to make some compensations, such as working longer hours to deal with the increasing demands at work. But that meant having to sacrifice that time that she had to walk to work and pack her lunch. It was those things that led Sarah to not be able to stick to her goals. The response is what makes all the difference in the situation. This is a critical point. So as we saw, there was a chain of events in this situation with Sarah. She was having more stress that led her to feeling more rushed, and she had less time for herself. She was driving to work instead of walking, not taking time to prepare her own meals. Then she was missing her meals and snacks at work. And when she got home, she was tired and starving. And eventually she ended up ordering food and sitting on the couch because she was exhausted. One thing to notice is how Sarah was speaking to herself in that context. So self-talk, as we discussed earlier in the program, is very, very important. Those messages that we are giving ourselves are very powerful. And so pretend, for example, that Sarah is your best friend. What would you say to Sarah to help her to get on track again? We know that Sarah had said, oh, well, it wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to last. Instead of saying that, perhaps Sarah could have said, you know what? Congratulations. Good job. I've recognized the fact that there's been a lapse. What do you think might have happened instead if Sarah had a more positive or maybe even just more neutral self-talk? Perhaps she might have been able to come up with some strategies or some solutions. And we know that having a lapse is part of the change process. So one thing that we can do is to try to plan for potential setbacks from the get-go. So how can we break this chain of events? A vicious cycle can be broken with one small change. Maybe start with the smallest change possible. So what are some ideas, asking you guys in the audience, what are some ideas that could help? For example, maybe waking up a bit earlier to allow more time to pack her lunch, having some snacks available at work, or maybe consider having some options available so that she's able to have some more balanced meals when buying some food. Maybe if she has access to a cafeteria, she could buy some healthier options there. Or maybe during her lunch break, trying to squeeze in a quick walk around the block. If she has a chance, maybe on a weekend, plan some supper meals ahead. Try to get the ingredients ready so that she can make a quick meal when she gets home and she's exhausted on the weekdays. Sarah could also try to plan ahead for some takeout options that might be a little more balanced. Or perhaps the solution is asking for some help at work. Maybe there's somebody who could give Sarah a hand so that she's not so bogged down with all of the stress at work. Again, key here is to try to plan ahead, planning for potential setbacks, trying to strategize some solutions that might be able to help to keep us back on track. Prepare for possible setbacks. If we plan ahead for potential setbacks in challenging situations, we can be better prepared and ready with some solutions. So when it comes to problem solving, think of 3 steps. So step number 1 is determine what is the problem. In order to help us accurately determine what the actual problem was that caused the lapse in the first place, it's helpful to look at the situation. You could ask yourself, what brought me here? Have my priorities changed? Has my situation perhaps changed? Is this a temporary or a permanent situation? What are my goals right now? What's most important to me? Remember, when we're going through this process, we want to be curious, not furious. Look at a setback as an opportunity to learn something new about yourself and the situation that you've encountered. This will in fact help to make you better equipped to deal with the lapse that might come about in the future. So step 2 is to consider the possible solutions. It can be useful to think back about the situation you worked through in the past that was successful. How did you manage in that situation? Maybe do a brainstorm of some possible solutions. So maybe ask others for help. So going to a family member, a friend, or maybe a healthcare provider. Think outside the box. You don't know what's going to happen, that something might work for you, and so others might have some helpful solutions. What can be very helpful is if you make a list, if you write down some of those possible solutions so that you can refer to them again later. So step 3 is to take action. So now that you've got your list of possible solutions that will address the problem, we want to pick a solution from the list and give it a go, give it a try. Choose the simplest thing you can do. Be sure to make one change at a time rather than trying to make many changes all at once. When you're making a change, try to give your plan a fair chance. So if it's not working after a week or two, you may need to go back and adjust your plan or go back to the previous step. So go back to step 2 and pick another solution from your list. Maybe that one will work better. If you're still struggling with getting back on track, ask yourself if you've identified the correct problem. It's possible that you may need to go back to step 1 and determine if you have identified the correct problem. For example, we had identified the issue for Sarah was a new big project at work, and that was causing her to work overtime. But if this wasn't the case, and the reason why she was feeling tired at the end of the day and unable to plan her meals and her snacks was due to maybe perhaps an undiagnosed iron deficiency, or maybe Sarah had another health problem like a thyroid problem, you can imagine that the list of possible solutions we came up with would be very different. So if in fact Sarah's problem was that she had an iron deficiency, she would need to see her doctor and have some blood work done and seek an appropriate treatment for that. Another example, if you're having difficulty with meal planning, the possible solutions might be quite different if the real problem isn't identified. So maybe the actual problem is that there's too much stress, or somebody might not have adequate finances to make healthier meals, planning in advance, or they might not have the knowledge or the tools to get started. So I'd encourage you to take a look in your workbook under Chapter 6, where you can write out your thoughts on your own personal roadblocks and maybe some things that have been sabotaging, and how might you use strategies to overcome those personal roadblocks. So have a look at Chapter 6 in your workbook. So let's put it into action. Set a goal that is going to help you to practice mindful eating, or choose one way to re-engineer your food environment in order to reduce eating triggers. Set yourself up for success. Plan ahead for challenging situations. So to summarize, to wrap it all up, remember the vitality approach, becoming in tune with what your body needs to support a healthy, active lifestyle with positive self-image. The vitality approach means being aware of your environment and your learned behaviors and how they can impact your daily choices. It's loving your food, it's listening to your body, and it's giving your body what it needs. This means eating a variety of foods to satisfy your health and your taste buds. Healthy eating is not about deprivation. It's about making yourself a priority and taking pleasure in providing nourishment for your body and your soul. So pay attention to your hunger and fullness levels and how certain foods make you feel. It's about understanding the effects of food on your body, and through this understanding, it will help you to make better choices for your personal health goals. The vitality approach means moving in every day in your own way. So it means picking activities that you enjoy. Be active because it feels great and because you care for your body and you want it to feel its best. Finally, the vitality approach means being kind to yourself. Value your body for all that it can do and appreciate what it has done for you. After all, you only have one body. So try to maintain an attitude of gratitude in all areas of your life. All these aspects are very important on your journey to becoming a healthier you. So with that, I want to congratulate each and every one of you for being part of the Healthy You program. You've achieved tremendous success by completing this program and going through the session week by week. So congratulations, you have been an amazing group to work with. So that brings us to the question period for today's session. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them now. Just want to thank everyone for joining us for the Healthy You program. We hope that it's given you some ideas to begin making changes. We encourage you to follow up with your dietitian. You have access to dietitian services through the Chatham-Kent Family Health Team, Tilbury and Thamesview Family Health Team, and also through the Chatham-Kent Community Health Centers. We'd be more than happy to touch base with you and to continue to follow up. Because we have covered a lot of information in Healthy You, often we have participants who will ask us if they can take the Healthy You class again, and that's always an option. So please feel free to touch base and refer any friends that you might have or any other participants that you think would benefit from the program, and you're more than welcome to take it again. As a reminder, we have a feedback form that we hope that you can complete in order to give us a sense of how you found the program, and we're always trying to improve it and build upon it. So please take a moment to fill that out and send it back to us. That would be very much appreciated. Another big thank you to all the participants. If you're looking for some more information on groups, please have a look at our websites for each of the family health teams in the CHC. We have different programs and services and some events that are coming up, so keep an eye out for those. And again, thank you so much for participating in Healthy You.